So here we are in Procreate, and I've made a walk cycle animation with this flower using a tutorial that we have in the class schedule. You can see down at the bottom I have animation assist on. That is up here, canvas animation assist. And I can play my animation so you can see what it looks like. Or I can just sort of scroll through it like that. And then you can see the layers that I have in Procreate. I have a background and guides. The guides are turned off. And then I have 8 frames, but it was a little jumpy, so I decided to add frames in between those 8 frames, hence the 1.2, 2.2. So the way that you share that, you just go up to Settings, Share, PSD, and I normally just use AirDrop, and it normally shows up in my Downloads folder. And there it is.
Okay, so now we have this file, and let's take a look. Here it is. She exported a Photoshop document or PSD, and I'm just going to create a frame animation as if I was making a GIF in Photoshop, and I'll choose. So I create the animation, and I'll make frames from layers just so I can test it. And I had the background layer on and the guides layer on, so I'm going to delete the frames real quick and hit play and just confirm that the animation exported fine and it works in Photoshop, because this is the next step before we go into Unity. And it looks great. So I hit stop, and I'm going to undo because I don't need the frame animation, and I'll double click to close that window. The next step is to crop it so that it's a square image, because, well, first of all, it's a square artwork, and it's just walking, so it's not really expanding out of that square. But second, we need to make it power of 2 so that it is efficient and makes an efficient use of the pixel data that it reserves in memory. Now I'll hold down Shift so I can get a square and crop it, moving with the arrow keys, and hit return. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is Command Option I to get the image size up, and it's 1175 pixels square, and I want to use a power of 2 dimension. I was going to do 124, but I think that the size of a character inside of a regular HD 1920 by 1080 pixel dimension screen would be closer to 512 or even 256 pixels by 256 pixels. So I'll do 512 and hit return. And so now we've rescaled it. I'm going to zoom in until it's, as it says right here, 100%. And that's about as big as that character would ever be, I think, in a game, unless you're doing some kind of, unless you're targeting a really high-end display. I think 512 by 512 pixels is a good size for a character, and it's, unless you're doing pixel art, it's a good size for a character, and it's power of 2, so it makes use of all the pixels in that block. Before we save it, I'm going to turn off the guides layer. I'm going to turn off the background layer. I'm going to leave all the other layers on, because when we import it into Unity, the package we use will look to see which layers are enabled, and it will make sprites automatically out of those. So I'm going to use Shift-Command-S. Make sure you save as, and you choose, instead of Photoshop document, large format document, which is, again, a PSB. And so now we can go over to Unity Hub, and we'll create a new project. And I'm going to choose the version that I want to create, of the editor that I want to create the project for. And I'm going to use the latest version for the Mac M1 Apple Silicon computers. And I'll set it to 2D because we have 2D art, so we're making a 2D game. And I'm going to call it walk cycle demo. Okay, so now we have the project that we just created open in Unity. And the first thing I'm going to do, because I just get so annoyed by the two-column layout, that's the default in Unity, which doesn't allow you to actually see files, but just the folders, and you have to look in this other strange column to see the files. So the first thing I always do when I open up a new project in Unity is I drag the hierarchy here to take up the full height next to the inspector, and then I take the project window, convert to one column layout so that it shows you the actual files in the folder like every other file system in the world. And then I move it over here so that I can easily drag from my project into the scene via the scene window or into the scene via the hierarchy. Let's talk about getting this file in here. So I'm referring to this list of steps, and so we've exported the PSD from Procreate, and we converted it to a PSB file, and now we're going to bring the artwork into Unity, and by making a new project and adding the PSD importer package. So let's start with that. Go to Window, Package Manager, and if you choose 2D inside of the hub, it will automatically add the featured 2D collection of packages, which includes the animation package that you need to make animations, the sprite package that you need to edit sprites, and the PSD importer. So those are already in there if you follow the steps I did. If you didn't, and you're adding to another project, or you use a different template when you created your project, then just go to the package manager, and if you don't have those three packages I just mentioned, go into Unity registry and search for those packages. You can add the featured package, or you can add them one by one, and you'll see the green checks after they're installed in your project. So now we have the 2D importer, the PSD importer, PSD Photoshop document. Even though you make a PSB out of your PSD to use the PSD importer, it's still a PSB file that you drag into your assets. So here's the file that Joel made, and when it comes in, the PSD importer will recognize that it's a PSB file, and it will automatically give you a whole bunch of options. And it's going to assume, number one, that you're using sprites, and number two, that you are probably dragging in a character rig. We're not doing a skeletal animation or a puppet character rig. We're just using a PSB for just plain old sprite animation. So, so I'm going to uncheck in the character rig. I'm going to uncheck use as rig because, again, we don't have a skeleton. And then any change you make, you have to press apply before it actually updates and shows those changes. And there's an error over here. It's inside of the engine. There's some kind of problem. I'm sure it'll be fixed in a future version of Unity, but just ignore it if you see an error while you're using this in 2022. Okay, so we've got this file, and Unity has automatically recognized the different layers that we enabled and converted those to sprites. And so I can step through them like this. And notice also that if I click on here, I can see all the settings. I can also see, it's kind of hard, but you can see that there's that Unity has also made a sprite sheet. So it's already kind of separated those from layers into a packed sprite sheet. And so when I build this project for a PC or for an iPhone or whatever, it will flatten those into a sprite sheet and pack them in there real tight and make it more efficient for us. Okay, so let's go over some of the important settings. So your texture type should be sprite and 2D. And your sprite mode should be multiple. those two things have to be enabled before you see these sprites, because that's how Unity, those are the settings that it needs for any image, raster image you put in. We don't need character rig. I'm going to collapse that. And the layer import gives you an option to include hidden layers. We're not going to do that, so I'm just going to collapse that. I will point out that in the latest version of Unity, and the 2021 version I'm using, not the LTS 2020 version, the PSD importer has a separate layer management tab, and when you click that, you can see all of the layers that are enabled and hidden in your PSD. If you have folders in your, or they're called groups in Photoshop, then you'll be able to see those, and you can actually you'll see options here to treat those as single sprites or multiple sprites. So if you had a folder and that folder was just the head and you wanted that to be one sprite in the game, then you could check an option here to do that. We have a pretty simple 16 frame walk cycle, so there are no folders in there. Okay, so let's review our steps here now. So we've imported the PSB, we checked our settings. We might come back to this reset anchors. We will see what happens when we do when we put the artwork in the game. So let's do that. So here's the scene, and there are a couple of options. Ultimately, what we need is a game object in the scene that we can attach the animations that we make to it, and then attach a script to it so that we can control the display of the animation and the position of the character in the scene. So one of the easiest ways that to get an animation, a sprite animation, into a game object in a scene is just to highlight all of the frames of the animation and click and drag them into your hierarchy or your scene. And when you do, you can see that Unity's Unity's changing the cursor so that I have like a curvy arrow and this word multiple. And so when I drop it, it's going to prompt me to make a new animation. And I'm going to keep all my files organized here. So I'm going to make a new folder called animations. And what it's going to do is it's going to make an animation clip, which is a timeline with, multiple pictures, that are displayed over time, an animation. But it's also going to make another file called an animator. And it's basically the way it'll be attached to the game object that it makes, and it will give us the option to choose which animation is displayed at which moment in time based on the input from the user. Okay, so the folder's called animations, and I'm going to rename the animation as well. So this is the flower walk. Cool. So here's the game object that we made, and it just used the name of the first sprite. I'm going to rename it to flower. And notice that it has a transform like all game objects, and it has a sprite renderer because it's a sprite, and it needs that component to be able to render sprites and choose the layer that it renders them on, etc. And then it added the animation controller, or the animator. And if we look in the animations folder, we'll see there's the flower walk, and this is the animation itself. And then here's the controller, and I'm going to rename that to flower controller. And so let's look at those. Window, animation, animation. We'll open that tab, and I'll dock it here. And then window, animation, animator. And then I'm going to dock that down there too. Okay, so if you click on your game object, in our case flower, and then click on animation, you can select all the animations that are connected to that animation, to that game object right here. Right now it's only flower walk. The way that you connect these is through the animator component. So the flower has an animator component, and it has our flower controller. And in the controller, we have the references in this kind of node diagram to the different animation clips that we add. So the default one is flower walk. And so that's in there now, and we can preview that in the timeline, in the animation tab. So let's do that now. I'm going to click play here, and that will preview it inside of the timeline. So the first thing we can notice is that we have a dark animation on a dark background, and it looks like there's some position issues, and we're going to fix those in a second. But let's first create a new game object for the background so that we can see what we're doing better. So I'm going to do, in the hierarchy, click the plus sign, 2D object, sprites, square, and then I'm going to drag it, the sprite that I just made so that it's big. I'm going to rename it background, and I'm going to set its order in layer to be negative something so that it drops behind. Unity is uses a left-handed coordinate system for its world, meaning as you increase on the z axis, it gets further away from you. But the sorting layers are confusing because I'm basically sorting layers determine the order in which objects are rendered. So think of it like a painting. You have a white background, and then you add a new, you have a layer, and you add a new painting, a new pumpkin picture on that. It's on top of that, and then you come in, you add something else, and so they're rendered in that order. And so it's a little confusing because it's not the same as the z-axis. In fact, I could move these on separate z-axes, and still the rendering layer controlled by the sprite renderer will make the flower on top of the other one. Okay, so the background is -57, so it's behind the flower, which is set to 0. And we can see now our character. So I click on the flower, click on the play button again. We can see it much better, and we can also definitely see that there's an issue with the position. Okay, so this is happening because, I'm going to save the scene here. This is happening because if you click on the PSB file you imported and open the sprite editor, then you can see that, well, we left the numbers in, and I can see them right there. Here's the number 6 and the number 7, I think I saw it there, yeah. And so I left those in there mainly because it's a good reference while I'm working on them, and this is not for production, it's really to teach, so it's just fine that they're in there. And so, but if imagine your character is running like this, and if they're in this position, and one of their hands is longer than the other, then the center of their animation is going to change. And then they do this, and then if the pixels are cropped tight to the edge of the pixel, if the sprite is cropped to the edge of the pixel, then this frame is going to be much more narrow than this frame. And that's what's going on here, but because I left the numbers in it, I think it's even more accentuated, which is good because we can see it and talk about it. So take, for example, number 7 up here versus this one over here. You can see right away that they're much different in size. And so there may be some option that I don't know about that's in the latest version of the PSB importer to make it not do this, to keep a uniform size in the PSB importer. One way to fix this would be to export a sprite sheet with a standard size for each frame. So each frame is 512, and they're separated and positioned directly in the middle of their frames. That would be one way to fix this. I think the kind of easiest way right now is to just go in and make sure that the anchors, which are these little doodads here, are in the same spot on the character itself. And because I'm a cyclist, I think about hips a lot, and how that your hips should always be over the bottom bracket. So if you're going downhill, you lean kind of back so that your weight is directly over the middle bottom bracket of your bike. And if you're going up, you do the same. You keep your hips over the bottom bracket. And so what I'm going to do is just go in and find the right bony part of the hip of this character. And I'm just going to drag the anchor for each of these to that, what I perceive as that spot. It's not going to be perfect, but I'm not the artist either. And so, but once we do this, then the anchor for each of these, or the position of the image in the sprite animation will be based on the anchor point. And regardless of whether there's some hanging pixels or the character's holding a giant spatula, it won't matter because they all have their anchor point is in a uniform place that is in a central part of the core of their body that should not jump around. Okay, so I've moved all these around, and I'm going to click apply up here, and I can close the sprite editor, and now I can come back in here and hit play and test it, and we can see that they are all positioned in a uniform place, regardless of any hanging pixels that are out in other places. It looks mostly good at 12 samples per second. But we may change that later. So this was the optional reset anchors option. So we've made the object, we've made the walk animation, and so we're going to make an idle and a jump animation, and then we're going to connect the animation to different states in the animator. So click on the flower, and you can see again, since we've selected the flower, we can see the animations that are attached in the animator or the animator controller, and we can see which animations there are. And so right now we only have one. We're going to make two more. We'll make flower idle, and we'll make flower, whoops, jump. Now, these are going to be really simple versions of these. I'm just going to go in here and to the flower walk, and I'm going to pick one of these that I think looks most like a jump. We'll say that one, and I'm going to select the keyframe, copy, walk over here to the jump, and paste. And so there it is. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the idle. I'll pick one of these that looks like, what does this flower look like when it stops walking? Maybe it's that. So I select the keyframe, copy, come over to flower idle, and paste. And there it is. Okay, so now we have three animations, or you could call them animation clips, the timelines. And in the animator, now we have those we can see those others here too. Now, there's nothing that will actually play these because we don't have any transitions to those. The default right now is set so when the game starts or the scene starts or the flower is added to the scene, the default is that the walk animation will play. But we probably won't be doing that. We'll probably want the idle animation. So we're going to set that layer as the default state. So now the idle is the default. And then we're going to add in a second, we're going to add a script that allows us to control it. And to do that, we need to keep track of information inside of our animator. We need to know two things. We need to know its speed, because if its speed is greater than 0, well then it's not idle, it's walking or jumping. And then we're going to use another value called is jumping. And so if its speed is greater than 0 and it is jumping, then we want to display the jump animation. But if its speed is greater than 0 and it's not jumping, then we want to display the walk animation. To do that, we'll go into parameters in this parameters tab, and we're going to add a float. A float is any kind of number that has a decimal. So that's going to be our speed. And it's going to be negative between 0 and -1 and 0 and +1. And then we're going to add a Boolean true or false value, and it's going to be is jumping. And I'm using what's called Pascal case. Thank you. And then I'll do the same when I reference these values in the script. Okay, so now we have these two values, and essentially any time that the speed is greater than 0 and we're not jumping, we want to play the walk animation. So rather than making a transition from here to this one and to this one to back, and the easiest way is, because any state can allow the flower walk to happen, we're going to make a transition from any state, which is basically like anytime that happens, not only when we're transitioning from idle or from jump. So basically we're just like doing 50% of the labor here by using the any state option. And so we're making a transition to flower walk. And then if you click the transition, you can come over here and you can set the conditions for when that'll happen. And so right now, because we've added our two variables here, we can click the plus sign and we can say, when the speed is greater than, and instead of 0, because computers sometimes have problems with floating point values, I'm going to do 0.01, which is a very, very small amount of speed. Rather than saying is equal to 0, float, like testing 0, equality and 0 is a little catchy, so I'll just say it's greater than 0.01, and then we'll be safe. And is the speed greater than 0.1, and are we not jumping? Then we should display the flower walk animation. And then the same thing goes for the jump. Here's our transition from any state to the flower jump animation. Is the speed, well, it doesn't matter if the speed, so we're just going to use is jumping, because speed doesn't really matter whether we're moving to the left or right or not. We can jump while we're standing still. So is jumping is true at any time, should transition to flower jump. And there's some more settings here, and I'm going to tweak those in a second once we see what this looks like. So I think that will illustrate better what we're doing. Cool. So, and then finally we need one more transition to transition back to flower idle. We need to make sure when our speed is less than 0.01, and not jumping, then we'll transition back to flower idle. I think that's good. I think we can test that now. I'm going to hit play, and we don't have any scripts here. What really should just happen is that the idle animation should display, and with the flower selected, the game playing the flower selected, in the animator I can see any state is doing what it's supposed to do, which is transitioning back to flower idle, and I can see it's looping right here, and that's great. And you can actually come in here and test these values, and I can come over here and say, let's say speed is 1. And the second that I change that value, and because I'm only changing the values while the game is playing, these won't be saved. I can test my animation right here. And I can see that it transitioned to flower walk, and that's great. But I can see that it's not allowing the whole thing to play, and that's not great. So to change that, you need to edit the transition, click on the transition, and I'm leaving it play so we can see the difference while it's running. And we have, so we have two settings here we have to look at. We have exit time and fixed duration. And so if I say there is an exit time, then it will leave, oh, turn that back to 1. There we go. So because I said it has an exit time, it basically knows that, and it has a fixed duration, it basically knows that there's a full length to it. And if I uncheck exit time, every time it seems to want to go back. Yeah, so here you can see now there's no exit time and it has gone back, right? So here, let's stop, because that felt a little clunky. Let's say that for flower walk, I want the full cycle to run before it transitions. And for each of these, I want them to transition immediately. So I'm going to change the duration to be 0 on all of these. All right. So I think we'll hook up the controller before we make any more edits to this. Now we've connected to animation states. We're not done with it, but we've got a good start here. And again, to recap, we created the 3 animations. They appeared here, and then we added transitions from any state. And then we made sure there was no duration between each transition, so they transition immediately. The second you hit the left arrow, it should start walking, and then we did edit the exit time on one of them, but we're going to come back to that. Okay, so let's add the script. So this link right here will take you directly to this file, which is in another sample project, and this file is called PlayerController.cs. Okay, as in C#. And we're interested in just the name, player controller, and we're gonna add this script to this game object in Unity. So click on flower, click add component, paste in that name, just flower controller, not .cs. Unity will take care of the file extension for us. New script, create and add. So it added a new file, and it's compiling it. And cool, so now we can either double click it here, or we can double click it on the flower and open it up inside of Visual Studio, and we can paste in the code that will allow us to control this character. So while that's opening, I'm going to return to the link where this file is. And this is a preview, it's been formatted and so forth, but if you click raw, then you'll get just the plain text file, and you can click in there. I don't need to update packages, thank you. And you can click in here and just Command A and Command C and copy that whole thing. And you can paste this into the file that you opened up in Visual Studio, Player Controller, and just select everything that's in there and delete it, and then paste. And again, our file name is Player Controller, and the class name is Player Controller. These need to match. The capitalization also needs to match. So this file is mostly created by other people, but then I kind of moved it all together into a version that I thought was solid. And so it's if I was to give credit, I would credit Brackeys, I would credit Craft Games, which are done up here on the top in the code. Okay, so I pasted that in there, I hit save, I'm going to come back, and now we can see that our game object has the player controller script and a whole bunch of new properties to add. Okay, so in order to get this script to work, we need several things. we're going to use the physics engine to control jumping and gravity. So we need to add a rigid body 2D because we're in 2D space. And you can see now the rigid body has been added, and the rigid body allows the physics engine to control and add and move a character based on gravity and whether or not it's standing on something. And then the second thing we need is a collider. And because the shape of this thing is, there's like a big circle at the top, we'll do a circle collider 2D, again 2D. And you can see the green box that now is surrounding our object. And this defines the body in space and what it can bump into. And so to edit the collider, you click this little button. And then there are little bitty anchor points you can drag here. So I'm going to drag it to define the shape of the flower. And I'll click that again to unselect it. And then we need to define some kind of collider for the feet, which are always moving. So we wouldn't want to do a rectangle because you can run into things and get caught. So we'll do another circle that's a little smaller that just defines the bottom of the mass of the body. So I'll add a second circle collider 2D, and yeah, you can see how it was added there. And now if I click edit here, I should be able to edit either one of them. I'm going to click up there. Yeah. So because there are two circle collider components, it's only showing me one edit collider button, and I clicked it and I'm editing the bottom one. And I'm just going to scale it down so that, I mean, this does not look like a plant if I just look at the way that it bumps into things in the world, but it will be sufficient to allow us to move around in the world and bump into things like you would expect the animation to do. Okay, so I'm going to uncheck that because we now have a collider, so we can run into things. We have a rigid body 2D, so we can, so physics will affect us. We have the animator that's controlling the animations that are visible, and we have our player controller that needs to access all these things. We added the components. We need to add these child objects. These child objects are, they're just new game objects. So click on the flower, right click, insert a empty game object inside a flower, and call this one ceiling check. The case and the name matters. And insert another one, another empty, called ground check. All right, so these are two empty game objects, and their only purpose is to be a reference to the top of the player and the bottom of the player. So select the ceiling check and the move tool, and just drag this to roughly the top of this player. And then do the same thing for the ground check and drag it roughly to the bottom. Basically, it's going to check to see if we're standing on the ground. You can drag these in here if you like, or the script will automatically look for them as long as you've got the names right. So if I wanted to drag them in there, I would just drag like that for the ceiling check and like that for the ground check. And I'll just make sure that ceiling check and ground check are, yeah. Okay, and then the last thing we need to do before we, well, there are two more things. But we have to set up a ground layer and create an actual ground for it. So let's make a new sprite, 2D object, sprite square, and I'm going to give it a different color so we can see the ground. And this is going to be our ground layer. Let's call it ground. And I'm going to click on the rect transform tool and drag it down here. Hold down Option and expand both sides. And now this is the ground, but there's no collider that defines the edge of this thing in the physical space. So we need a box collider 2D. And We don't have to edit it. It will automatically assume the dimensions of the box. If you like, you can click this and you can see the green buttons appear, but we don't need to edit that. The thing we do need to do is tell the game engine that there's a ground layer. This is not the same as a rendering layer. The layer or layer masks allow us to control which things can interact with which other things in terms of their physics. So by adding a layer called ground, we're now saying there's a layer or there's a collection of game objects in the scene that are called ground, and then we can reference those with other scripts in the game and say, when you touch the ground, you should stop. You should be able to walk on the ground, and you should also know that you're not jumping if you're touching the ground. If you aren't touching the ground, then you are jumping, and you should show the jump animation. Okay, so we've added that layer, not the sorting layer, the regular layers. Click back on ground and make sure you, not sorting layer. Sorting layer is what appears. We're setting the layer up here, so the ground layer. So we're saying we're on the ground layer mask. And then inside of the flower, in the player controller, now we can set the ground layer is indeed called ground. Cool. So now, save your work, hit play. And so, first of all, notice something. We didn't fall through the air. We've got a rigid body and gravity is turned on, but we didn't fall. We stopped at the ground. That's great. And we can use the arrow keys and start to walk around. And I just love it when this happens. This is so great. And so things are happening, but something's not right here. And so I'm going to hit stop. And usually in class, we kind of walk over why this might happen, but I'm just going to jump right to it. In the rigid body 2D, you have constraints based on how you want physics to affect your character. We don't want to rotate on the z-axis. That's the axis going in and out of the screen. We don't want to rotate on that. If you were doing like a pinball game, you would. But I'm going to check this to freeze rotation so that doesn't happen. And I'll hit play again and we'll test it. And so now we can see that we are walking around. And the script is automatically flipping the sprite. It's just flipping it on the y-axis based on which direction that I'm moving, and the animation is playing the correct animation. And if I let up, it's going to jump to the flower idle animation. And there's only one frame, so it's not really doing anything. It's just resting on that frame. If there was like an idle animation, it would play all of those frames until we did something different. And then there's the jump animation. And you can see, again, when I click up on the arrow key, is jumping is set to true in the animator controller. And then because of that transition, that condition set on that transition, it jumps to the flower jump. And so now I can walk around and jump. And it's not perfect. It appears to be, there's a skip in there. And when I say skip, it actually looks like it's skipping. And we can go and debug that. And another thing that we should probably change is that it's the frames are not playing as fast as the thing is moving. And there are parameters inside of the script, the player controller script to control how fast it can run and how high it can jump and how fast it will fall. And you can manipulate all of these while it's playing, which is real fun. And but if you think this is like a good speed for it to walk, but to move in the scene, but you think that so you would want the animation to match that. So we can see that the animations is like a little too slow. In addition, we're having the skipping issue. So let's go and debug that real quick. So I click on the flower in the animation tab, under flower walk, let's hit play. And you can see that the full animation is there, but it's still slow. So let's increase the sample rate to maybe 18. And so now it's going to walk a little faster. And let's click on the animator again so we can see what's happening with the looping, and then we'll watch the flower walk again. So when I walk, now it's, closer to the speed we would expect, but it's still skipping. And if you look down here, flower walk, this is the feedback that we're getting as in the developing tool to show us when it's looping. And if I walk, you can see it's looping right there. So it's looping, uh-oh. I think I just walked off the edge of the scene. Let's double click on the flower, and yeah, I walked off the ground. That's okay, just stop the game and you can fix it. So the problem is that the transition settings are telling that there is an exit time, but that the exit time is 75%, which is part of the way you would control at what point during the loop that it starts to transition to a different animation if you had multiple conditions happening. And the reason why the animation tools like this are so complex, and the reason why you can set the exit time of the loop, is because what if the character is waving? That's one animation clip, and the character is running, and you want them to run and wave, or run and do this. So you wouldn't want to have to make an animation for all the inter animations that a complex character would have. And so these controls let you blend two animations together, and this exit time is one way you do that. Anyway, so it's normalized value. So 1 is the 100%. So I'm just going to set that to 1 so that it plays the whole animation all the time. And I'll hit play, click on the flower again, and now we'll see that the skip is gone. So the skip was basically happening because we were just seeing 75% of the frames, and now we can see that it's looping all the way across the whole thing. And there's our jump. And if we wanted to go in and add a platform, then we could just duplicate Command D the ground, call it a platform. Oh, platform, and there's our ground. Here's our platform. I think we'll be able to jump on that and hit play. And because this is a ground layer, the new platform is in the ground layer, once we're on top, it'll know that we are on the ground again, and we can jump and display the right animations. Okay, so let's review our steps here. I think we've done everything we set out to do. Took a little bit longer than like everything, but yeah. So these are the steps, and we'll export this video, upload it to YouTube, and paste it here.